Sister Eleanor woke before the bell, not because of sound, because of worry. It sat on her chest the way it had all night, heavy and unmoving. She lay still, counting breaths, knowing exactly what this morning meant. By sunset, 23 children would look to her for answers she did not have. She had prayed, she had waited. And now Thanksgiving had arrived anyway. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the girls sleeping nearby. Small bodies curled under thin quilts, trusting, unaware. That trust hurt the most. The kitchen confirmed what she already knew. Flour enough for bread, a scoop of lard, potatoes past their prime, no turkey, no apples, no sugar for pie. Just survival dressed up as gratitude. She rested both hands on the table and closed her eyes. "Help me," she whispered, not demanding, just honest. She lit the lantern and stepped out back to fetch firewood. That was when she saw it. A wagon stood in the frost, wheels rimmed with ice, canvas drawn back like a curtain pulled aside. For one breathless moment, her mind refused to understand what her eyes were telling her. Then the cold air carried the scent of apples, fresh poultry, coffee. Sister Eleanor did not move. The lantern shook in her hand. She stepped closer. One sack of flour, another. Crates of potatoes, onions, carrots. Jars of preserves catching the light like stained glass. A dressed turkey, wrapped careful and clean. A small cloth sack tied with twine. Peppermints. Her knees gave way. She caught herself against the wagon's side, rough wood solid under her palm. Tears came fast and hot, blurring everything. Someone had seen them. Someone had answered without being asked again. Behind her, a small voice broke the silence. "Sister, what is it?" Quote, "Little Annie stood barefoot on the boards, hair wild from sleep. Then another child. Then another. Soon the doorway filled with wide eyes and held breath. 23 miracles waking at once. Who brought it?" asked Luke, the oldest at 12. Sister Eleanor wiped her face and steadied her voice. "Someone kind." "An angel," Annie whispered. Sister Eleanor studied the wagon more closely. Iron-banded wheels, careful joinery. This was no farmer's scrap cart. Tracks led away toward the northern ridge, where the large cattle spreads lay quiet and private. "Sometimes," she said softly, "angels wear boots." The children touched the supplies with reverence, as if they might vanish. Sister Eleanor let them marvel. But her mind worked. This gift came from means, and from someone who knew their need but chose silence over praise. After a modest feast filled with laughter and crumbs, Sister Eleanor borrowed the church's small wagon and drove into town. The list of supplies sat folded in her pocket. Every item memorized. Hendrick's general store smelled of leather and coffee. Mr. Hendrick looked up, surprised. "Didn't expect to see you today, sister." "I need answers," she said gently. She laid out the list. His expression shifted, recognition, then discomfort. His gaze flicked toward the window. "That order came through last night," he said slowly. "Cash paid. No name asked for. But you know who placed it." He sighed. "That'd be Caleb Rowe." The name carried weight. The Rowe Ranch sprawled across 3 counties, wealth built on cattle and silence. "Widower," Hendrick added quietly, "lost his wife and children years back. Keeps to himself now. Doesn't welcome visitors." Sister Eleanor nodded. "A man who feeds hungry children isn't closed. He's just hurting." She thanked him and left before doubt could settle in. Rowe Ranch rose from the prairie like a house waiting for voices. 2 stories, wide porch, windows reflecting the cold afternoon light without warmth. She tied her horse and climbed the steps. The door opened on a tall man with a weathered face and guarded eyes. Caleb Rowe looked like someone unused to being found. "I've come to thank you," Sister Eleanor said simply. "The children ate because of you." His jaw tightened. "You're mistaken." The storekeeper confirmed it. Silence stretched. He looked past her toward the open land. "No thanks necessary." She met his gaze when he finally looked back. "Then allow us this. Please join us for Christmas dinner." Something flickered, then vanished. "I'm not fit company," he said, "especially for children." "We'll save you a place," she replied. He closed the door before she could say more. From the yard, she glanced back once. Through the window, she saw him standing alone in a wide hallway meant for laughter. A man surrounded by space and starved of life. That night, Caleb sat at his long dining table. 1 plate. 10 empty chairs. He poured whiskey he would not drink. The image of children crowded around a table haunted him, not their hunger, their belonging. December crept in with snow and memory. He worked until exhaustion claimed him, fixed fences already whole, counted cattle already counted, anything to avoid the house. One evening, drawn by something he could not name, he rode near the orphanage and stopped among the trees. Light spilled from the windows. Children laughed, sang. He watched until the cold numbed his fingers. Back in his workshop, he reached for wood. His hands moved without thought. A small horse took shape, then another, then a doll. By dawn, a handful of toys stood before him, proof that some part of him still remembered how to hope. Christmas Eve, he left them on the orphanage porch, watched from the dark. When he saw their joy, something inside him cracked open, not broken, open. But fear held. As the year turned, the memory followed him, of Sister Eleanor's steady eyes, of children who believed angels came when they were hungry, and somewhere deep inside Caleb Rowe, a question refused to stay silent. What if staying was the miracle he feared most? Caleb Rowe tried to forget Christmas. He buried himself in work, rising before dawn and riding until the stars returned. Fence lines were checked twice, then 3 times. Gates were mended that did not need mending. The foreman noticed, but said nothing. Men like Caleb carried their storms inside, best not to step into them. Still, the house waited. Every night he returned to rooms too quiet for a place built by love. Furniture draped in cloth. A dining table long enough for a family that never came. He ate standing most evenings, as if sitting would invite ghosts to join him. He dreamed of children, not his. He had none left to remember. These children laughed, argued, dropped crumbs and told stories that went nowhere. They looked at him as if he belonged. He woke from those dreams with his chest tight and his hands clenched. January passed. Then February. Snow piled and melted and piled again. Each Sunday the sound of church bells drifted faintly across the prairie, reaching the ranch like a question. He never answered. Until one morning in early March, when he rode into town for supplies. He had planned the trip carefully. Early hour, quick in and out. But fate had its own timing. Sister Eleanor stood outside the church, speaking with the minister. She saw him at once. Her face lit with a warmth that made him want to turn his horse and flee. "Mr. Rowe," she said, crossing the muddy street without hesitation. "It's good to see you." He tipped his hat. "Sister." "The children still play with the toys," she said. "Luke has named every horse. Annie carries her doll everywhere." His throat tightened. "I'm glad. We missed you at Christmas dinner. I sent supplies." "You sent silence," she replied, not unkindly. They stood there, the space between them, heavy with what was not said. Then she spoke again, her voice softer. "One of the boys asked me something last week. Samuel. He's 6. Caleb's hands curled around the reins. He wondered, she continued, watching his face, if he'd done something wrong, if maybe he wasn't good enough for you to eat with. The words struck hard. He felt the breath leave him. "That wasn't." He stopped, tried again. "That wasn't my intention." "I know," she said, But children measure themselves by what we do, not by what we mean. She touched his horse's neck, grounding him. The door remains open, Mr. Rowe, if you find the courage. He nodded once and rode away before his voice betrayed him. Back at the ranch, the barn felt safer than the house. He leaned against a stall, breathing hard, the smell of hay sharp and honest. A child thought he wasn't good enough. The truth cut deeper. He didn't think he was good enough for them. That night, he did not sleep. He sat in the dark, with a bottle untouched, and stared at the toys lined on his shelf. They were meant as gifts. Now they felt like accusations. Spring came slow and muddy. March turned roads to rivers. The ranch demanded his attention, but his thoughts kept circling back to the orphanage on the hill, to laughter he'd only heard from the shadows. One evening, driven by restlessness he could not name, he pulled a journal from the dresser drawer he had not opened in years. His wife's handwriting filled the pages. Elegant. Certain. He turned to the last entry. James has so much love trapped inside him. I see it in how he builds and avoids. Love kept locked away turns bitter. Love given becomes medicine. Caleb pressed the book to his chest and wept for the first time since the ground closed over her grave. The answer came quietly. Courage was not about being ready. It was about showing up afraid. Thanksgiving came again, circling like a test he could no longer avoid. He loaded the wagon at dawn. Flour, vegetables, a turkey. And this time, he left the reins loose in his hands, giving himself no chance to turn back. The orphanage appeared over the rise. Smoke curled from the chimney. Light glowed in the windows. Life waited. He stopped, sat frozen. Every instinct screamed to leave the supplies and disappear. That was his pattern. That was his armor. Then he remembered a 6-year-old boy, measuring his worth. He climbed down. His knock echoed loud in the cold morning. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Sister Eleanor smiled. Not surprised, just ready. "We've been expecting you," she said. Children peeked from behind her, curious and cautious. Annie saw him first. Her face brightened, then faltered. "You came," Luke said, guarded but hopeful. "I did," Caleb managed. "Thought I could help unload." They worked together, passing sacks hand to hand. The children talked, asked questions. He answered in fragments. Somewhere between the flour and the firewood, his hands stopped shaking. When the wagon was empty, he turned to leave. A small girl stepped forward, younger than the others. She looked up at him, solemn. "Will you stay this time?" The question broke him. He knelt, meeting her eyes. Tears burned hot and unhidden. "Yes," he whispered, "if you'll have me." She threw her arms around his neck. He caught her without thinking, as if he'd been waiting for that weight his whole life. Inside, warmth wrapped around him. Coffee, bread, children's voices, noise and mess and life. At the table he sat among them, overwhelmed and whole. Annie explained paper chains. Luke described ranching plans. Sister Eleanor watched him with quiet understanding. For the first time in years, Caleb Rowe stayed. And as he carved the turkey with steady hands, surrounded by laughter, a fragile hope settled in his chest. Maybe coming home was not a place. Maybe it was a table. And maybe this time, he would not run. Caleb Rowe did not leave after dinner. He meant to. He truly did. The plan sat ready in his chest, like a practiced lie. Help unload. Share a meal. Disappear before the quiet questions began. But the children lingered. They lingered with stories that spilled over one another, with crumbs on their sleeves and laughter that came too easy to be rehearsed. With the unguarded way they leaned close, as if space between people was something only lonely adults needed. After the dishes were cleared, Annie tugged his sleeve. "Will you see the dormitory?" He hesitated, then nodded. The girls' room smelled of soap and wool. Small beds lined the walls, quilts folded with care. Annie showed him her doll, the wooden one he had carved by lantern light months ago. "She's named Rose," Annie said, Because she looks brave. Caleb swallowed. She does. In the boys' room, Luke had arranged the wooden horses in neat rows on his shelf. Each one faced the same direction, as if waiting for instruction. I made up stories for them, Luke said. They're all brothers. They don't leave each other behind. Caleb nodded, unable to speak. Downstairs, Sister Eleanor waited with 2 cups of coffee. They sat at the small kitchen table while the children settled for the night above them. The orphanage creaked and sighed around them, a living thing winding down. "You don't have to come every week," she said gently. "I know. You don't owe them anything. I know that too." She studied him for a moment. "Then why are you still here?" He stared into the dark coffee. "Because I don't want to be alone tonight." She accepted that without judgment. Winter loosened its grip inch by inch. Caleb began coming on Sundays. At first, he stayed on the edges, fixing hinges, sharpening tools, standing near doors like a man prepared to flee. Then one afternoon, Luke asked him to show the boys how to mend a fence. Caleb found himself explaining wire tension and knot strength, his hands moving with ease. The boys listened with fierce attention. For the first time in years, he heard himself laugh. It startled him. Annie liked to sit nearby and count. She counted nails, boards, clouds through the window. She counted his visits too. "You came again," she said each time, as if checking the world still worked. By spring, 2 of the older boys spent weekends at the ranch under the foreman's watchful eye. Caleb prepared the bunkhouse without being asked. He set extra plates on the table. The house echoed less. Still, nights were hard. Grief did not vanish because children laughed nearby. It waited, patient. It visited when the lights were out, and the rooms grew too quiet again. One evening, Caleb pulled his wife's journal from its hiding place and read until the words blurred. He spoke to her then, quietly, like she might still hear. "I'm trying," he said. "I don't know if I'm doing it right." The silence did not answer, but it felt less accusing than before. Summer brought dust and warmth. The children came more often, learned chores, learned patience, learned that animals had moods and weather did not care about plans. Caleb learned names, preferences, who hated carrots and who loved them, who cried quietly at night and who pretended not to notice. One afternoon, Sister Eleanor walked the long fence line with him. The prairie stretched wide and honest. "You're different," she said. "So are they." She smiled. "They needed a place to belong. You needed people to belong to." He stopped, looking out over the land. "I built all this, thinking it would fill me. Turns out it was just space. And now, he said slowly, it's starting to feel like a home." The test came in October, the anniversary of loss, of hospital rooms and small graves on the hill behind the ranch. Caleb woke shaking, the old weight pressing down hard. He saddled his horse with hands that would not steady. Rode hard. Rode until his chest burned and the memories chased him anyway. By dusk, he found himself outside the orphanage without knowing how he'd gotten there. Light spilled from the windows. The sound of singing drifted out. He sat on his horse, frozen. If he went in, the grief might spill where children could see it. If he left, the loneliness would win. The door opened. Sister Eleanor stood there, as if she had felt his presence. She did not speak. She simply stepped aside. Inside, Annie ran to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. No questions. No fear. Just trust. Caleb closed his eyes and let himself be held. They did not speak of the day. They did not need to. He stayed for supper, stayed for stories, stayed until the ache eased into something softer. Thanksgiving approached again. This time, Caleb did not wait for dawn. He arrived early, sleeves rolled, flour on his hands. The children swarmed him like he had always belonged. At the table, Sister Eleanor insisted he sit at the head. He resisted. Lost. They held hands for grace. When Sister Eleanor thanked God for bringing the lost home, Caleb felt his throat close. After dinner, as stars rose, he stood on the porch and listened to the quiet breathing of sleeping children inside. For the first time in years, the quiet did not feel empty. It felt full. And somewhere between the laughter and the long table, Caleb Rowe realized something simple and terrifying. He was no longer visiting. He was staying. Winter returned softer this time. Not kinder, just quieter. Snow fell in slow sheets, blanketing the prairie instead of assaulting it. Caleb Rowe found himself watching the weather now, not as an enemy to be endured, but as something to plan around. There were children who depended on clear roads, meals that needed to be shared. He did not call it responsibility. He called it habit. Every Sunday, the wagon rolled toward the orphanage without debate. He brought supplies, tools, sometimes nothing but himself. The children greeted him like something expected, not extraordinary. That was the strangest part. He was no longer a miracle. He was just there. Luke asked harder questions now. About land, about money, about what it took to build something that lasted. Caleb answered honestly, even when the truth felt sharp. Most things break if you don't tend them, he said once, tightening a fence post. That includes people. Luke thought about that for a long time. Annie stayed close, always close. She followed him like a shadow that hummed. She liked to sit beside him while he repaired chairs or sharpened blades, her feet swinging, her voice filling the silences he no longer feared. "Are you sad today?" she asked one afternoon. "Yes," he said. "Okay," she replied and went back to drawing. That was how grief lived now, named, allowed, not hidden. Sister Eleanor watched it all with quiet care. She never pushed, never praised. She simply made room. When Caleb spoke of his wife, she listened. When he fell silent, she respected it. One evening, as they walked the fence line together, she asked, "Do you ever feel guilty for being happy here?" Caleb stopped. The prairie stretched endless and pale before them. "Yes," he said after a moment. "Every time." She nodded. "That's love trying to protect memory. It's not a sin, but it can become a prison." He exhaled slowly. "I built a lot of prisons." "And you're unlocking them," she said, "one visit at a time." Spring brought mud and restlessness. The ranch needed hands. Caleb hired 2 older boys from the orphanage under the foreman's watch, paid them fairly, taught them carefully. The house changed. Extra boots lined the wall. Extra chairs pulled close to the table. Laughter echoed where silence once ruled. Caleb caught himself setting places for people who were not there yet, then realizing they would be soon. Still, something remained unfinished. The hill behind the ranch waited. 3 small graves, 1 larger stone. Names carved with care and avoidance. Caleb had not gone there in years. The children noticed. "Where does the path go?" Annie asked one day. "Nowhere," he said too quickly. She studied him. "Okay." But the question stayed. The breaking point came in June. A storm rolled in fast and violent. Thunder cracked close enough to rattle bones. One of the younger boys panicked, memories of past nights rising sharp and uninvited. He hid under a table, shaking. Caleb crouched beside him. "It's loud," he said, "but it passes." The boy sobbed. "What if it doesn't?" Caleb hesitated, then spoke the truth. "Then we pass through it anyway." The words echoed in his own chest. That night, after the storm moved on, Caleb walked the hill alone. The grass brushed his boots. The sky cleared enough for stars. He knelt before the stones. "I didn't know how to come back," he said aloud. "I didn't know how to live with the space you left." Quote. The wind answered softly. "I'm learning," he whispered. "I hope that's enough." He stayed until dawn. Summer ripened everything. The children grew. So did Caleb's laughter. He taught them to ride, to read clouds, to respect quiet. The orphanage and the ranch blurred into one shared life, Meals crossed back and forth. Work did too. The line between charity and family faded. But life tests what matters. In late August, a letter arrived. Official. Crisp. It spoke of land reassessment, of expansion, of opportunity that required Caleb's full attention in the city for months. He read it twice, folded it once, set it aside. That night, he did not sleep. The old voice returned, the one that whispered escape. That promised safety and distance. He imagined the orphanage without him, the children adjusting. They always did. At breakfast, Annie noticed his silence. "Are you leaving?" she asked. The room stilled. "I don't know," he said honestly. Her face fell, then steadied. "Okay," she said again, but her eyes searched his, asking a question too large for words. Sister Eleanor met his gaze across the table. No pressure, just presence. That afternoon, Caleb stood at the crossroads near the ranch. One road led toward opportunity, control, the old version of success. The other led back to noise, need, connection. He closed his eyes. For the first time, the choice felt heavier than fear. And as the sun dipped low, Caleb Rowe understood something he had been avoiding. Staying would cost him. Leaving would cost him more. He turned his horse toward the orphanage, not yet knowing what he would say, only that silence was no longer an option. Caleb Rowe arrived before dusk, not with answers, with honesty. The children were finishing supper when he stepped inside. The room smelled of bread and soap and the comfort of routine. Annie looked up first. She always did. "You came back," she said, as if confirming the ground was still solid. "Yes," he replied, "I did." Sister Eleanor met him near the door. She did not ask questions. She never rushed truth. She simply nodded and made space at the table. That, he was learning, was her quiet gift. They ate. They talked about small things. A torn book. A loose button. Luke's plans for a new fence design that might or might not hold. Caleb laughed when the design failed on paper. Luke laughed too. Failure felt safer now. Afterward, as the younger children were sent upstairs, Caleb remained at the table. His hands rested flat on the wood. He waited until the room softened into quiet. "I received an offer," he said. The words felt heavier, spoken aloud. "It would take me away, for months." No one spoke. "It's good money," he continued. "More land. More control." "Unless you," Sister Eleanor said gently. He nodded. "I thought I wanted it. A year ago I would have." Luke leaned forward. "Are you leaving?" Caleb looked at the boy, at the careful strength in his shoulders, at the way he watched adults now, not for promises but for patterns. "I don't know yet," Caleb said. "That's why I'm telling you." Annie's feet swung beneath her chair. "Does that mean we did something wrong?" Quote. The question cut deep and clean. "No," Caleb said quickly. He moved closer, lowering himself to her height. "You did everything right. This is about me, about figuring out what kind of man I want to be." She studied him, searching for cracks, then nodded. "Okay." The night stretched long. When the children slept, Caleb and Sister Eleanor sat on the porch. Crickets filled the dark. The prairie breathed. "I'm afraid," Caleb admitted. "Of leaving?" "Of staying," he said. "Of building something and losing it again." She did not look at him when she answered. "Love always risks loss. The only safe choice is loneliness." He exhaled. "I've tried that one. And it nearly killed me." She smiled, soft and knowing. The next morning, Caleb rode back to the ranch with the decision still unsettled. The letter lay folded in his pocket like a weight. The house greeted him with its wide, echoing calm. He walked room to room, touched chairs now worn by small hands, counted the extra boots by the door. Evidence of a life he hadn't planned, but could no longer imagine losing. At the window, he saw the hill. He saddled his horse and rode up the familiar path. The grass swayed. The air was warm. He dismounted and stood before the stones. "I've been offered more," he said aloud, "but I think I finally understand what enough looks like." The wind stirred. The names remained. "I miss you," he whispered, "but I'm not empty anymore." When he returned to the house, the answer had settled in his bones. He wrote his reply that afternoon, short, polite, final. The offer would pass. The weeks that followed felt different. Not easier, but clearer. Caleb invested where his feet already stood. He repaired the old schoolhouse roof, added rooms to the bunkhouse, began plans for apprenticeships, futures instead of fences. The children noticed. "You're not going anywhere," Luke said one evening. It was not a question. "No," Caleb replied, "I'm not." Annie beamed. "Good." Autumn returned. Leaves burned gold. The year curved back toward Thanksgiving. This time, there was no fear. Caleb arrived early, sleeves rolled, hands busy. He chopped vegetables, stirred pots, let flour dust his shirt. The children moved around him like a practice dance. At the table, Sister Eleanor placed him at the head without asking. He accepted without flinching. They held hands. "Thank you," Sister Eleanor prayed, "for those who choose to stay, for love that shows up again and again." Caleb swallowed hard. After dinner, the children shared what they were grateful for. Warm beds, full plates, new boots, horses that didn't kick. Annie spoke last. "I'm thankful," she said carefully, "that some people don't leave when they get scared." Caleb closed his eyes. Later, as stars climbed the sky, he stood outside with Sister Eleanor. The orphanage glowed behind them. The ranch waited beyond. "I used to think success meant building something no one could take from me," he said. "And now? And now I know it means building something I'd miss if it were gone." She nodded. "That's family." He looked back at the windows filled with light and laughter. For the first time, the future did not feel like a threat. It felt like an invitation. And this time, Caleb Rowe had already decided to accept. The first snow came early that year. It dusted the prairie soft and quiet, settling on fences and rooftops like a promise kept. Caleb Rowe stood on the orphanage porch before dawn, breath fogging the air, listening to the building wake. Pots clinked. Floorboards creaked. A child laughed upstairs, half asleep and unafraid. A year ago, this place had been desperation and prayer. Now it was routine. Now it was home. Thanksgiving morning unfolded without fear. There was food. There was warmth. There was the easy chaos of too many hands trying to help at once. Caleb moved through it all, with a comfort that still surprised him. He carried sacks, lifted benches, tied Annie's scarf when she couldn't manage the knot. "You're doing it wrong," Luke teased. "I'm doing my best," Caleb replied, grinning. "That's different," Luke said, and laughed. They gathered at the long table, just as the sun crept over the horizon. 23 children. One sister. One rancher who had once believed he was unfit for belonging. They held hands. Sister Eleanor's voice was steady as she gave thanks. Not for abundance alone, but for the courage to stay. For hearts softened by shared meals. For love that chose daylight instead of shadows. Caleb felt the words settle deep. After dinner, the children spilled outside, boots crunching snow, breath sharp with joy. Caleb watched them from the doorway, hands tucked in his coat. Annie built a crooked snowman. Luke argued about proportions. Someone fell. Someone laughed harder. Life, uncontained. Sister Eleanor joined him. "You look settled," she said. "I feel anchored," he replied, "like I finally stopped drifting." She nodded. "Grief doesn't vanish. It just learns where to sit." They stood in companionable silence. That afternoon, Caleb hitched the wagon, not to leave, but to bring children back with him. Sunday visits to the ranch had become tradition. Lessons waited, horses too patient for small hands. A future taking shape one skill at a time. At the ranch, the house no longer felt like a monument. It felt used, lived in, loud when it needed to be, quiet when it mattered. The children spread out, exploring, claiming corners with easy confidence. Caleb watched them from the doorway of the workshop, the place where it had all begun with wood and silence. He picked up a carving knife. Old habit. New purpose. Can I try? Annie asked, eyes wide. He showed her how to hold the tool, how to respect the grain, how to go slow. You don't rush things you care about, he said. She nodded, solemn. As winter deepened, the rhythm held. School, ranch, shared meals. The line between charity and family faded until it no longer mattered. Caleb visited the hill often now, sometimes alone, sometimes with the children, who brought wildflowers in summer and pine sprigs in winter. He spoke of his wife, of love, of loss that did not end connection. They're still part of you, Annie said once. Yes, he agreed, they are. Spring came gentle again. The older boys talked of futures that included options instead of endings. The ranch hired more hands. The orphanage repaired its roof with Caleb's help. The community noticed. Quiet generosity had a way of spreading. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Caleb sat on the orphanage porch with Sister Eleanor. You stayed, she said simply. Yes. You chose people over safety. He smiled. Turns out, they're the same thing. Thanksgiving returned once more, full circle and transformed. Caleb arrived early, rolled up his sleeves, and took his place without ceremony. The children made room without asking. That told him everything. They ate. They laughed. They planned futures that reached beyond the table. At the end of the night, when the children slept and the dishes were done, Caleb stood alone for a moment in the quiet kitchen. He rested his hand on the worn table, feeling the grooves left by years of use. A year ago, this place had saved him. Now, it was simply where he belonged. He stepped outside, breathing in the cold, and looked back once more at the glowing windows. He no longer stood in the dark. He had learned the hardest lesson of all. Love is not proven by what you give in secret. It is proven by what you stay for. And Caleb Rowe had finally learned how to stay.